So this month we are talking about different spiritual attributes in relation to leadership. And today I wanted us to take a look at the concept of compassion in relation to leadership. And February is Black History Month, and the theme for this month in Soul Matters, which is the curriculum we use with the children downstairs, is justice, equity, and equality. And so as I was listening to the choir rehearse on Wednesday evening, all of these beautiful songs about justice for the service this morning, I was reflecting on how compassion has been a necessary element of justice movements throughout the centuries. So once again, I am going to invite the compassionate wisdom of Howard Thurman into this dialogue as we consider what it means to incorporate compassion into leadership. And for those of you who are not familiar with Howard Thurman, I've given a few sermons about him, but Dr. Thurman was born in 1899 and raised by his grandmother, who was born as a slave. And the words I'm sharing for you today were spoken from various sermons that he shared between 1950 and 1979. So I'm not sure exactly which sermon or when he did this particular sermon. But, you know, obviously, somebody who was born in 1899 lived in a world of racial segregation and discrimination, in a time and place where he himself was not welcome in many parts of the country. And yet, when we listen to and read his words from almost over 100 years ago, we realize that his focus was on something that is truly timeless. And so, as you listen to these words, I invite you to listen to these in the present day context, because I believe that even 100 years later, he has wisdom for us. So these words that this quote that I'm gonna share are from a longer sermon that he was addressing and one of the very unique things about Howard Thurman was he created one of the first truly interfaith faith communities in the country in the 1940s and 50s. And so what he talks about here is the need for us to work on both the inner and the outer work to be done together, because it's not an either or, it's a both and. So this is from his sermon, The Nerve Center of Consent. He writes, "I can act in a way that the pattern of my behavior becomes the new nerve center of consent, so that those of us who are concerned about changing our lives or changing the society, about trying to make a decent human being of ourselves or a decent social order, must see clearly the flowing between the outer and the inner. It is not only true that the outer constantly and persistently informs that the inner constantly and persistently informs the outer, so as to redefine the meaning of the outer, but it is also true that the outer can persistently and consistently inform the inner." So in other words, if there is going to be justice in the world, there needs to be justice out here in the world, but there also needs to be that inner peace and calm within the individual, because you can't be raging inside and create peace outside. But you can't have raging outside and really have peace inside it. The two in an ideal world work together. And so one of the criticisms that Dr. Thurman had against him was because he was kind of a mystic, and there were so many people in the civil rights movement that wanted him to be out there and angry and marching, and he wasn't the person that was out there angry and marching. He was maybe angry, I don't know what his emotions were, but he wasn't out there. He was the place that Martin Luther King and the other civil rights leaders went after they marched. They would go to Howard Thurman and have dinner with him and his wife in their home to get regrounded and recentered with that inner. And so he goes a little deeper in explaining how it is that balance, and people can begin to get angry, or as he says, develop contempt for the retreater, for the person who withdraws, the thinker, the visionary. He received some of that criticism because people were like, why aren't you out doing something? And they couldn't see the value of the inner work. So he addresses this need for balance. So he says, and this is him just sort of reflecting on, sometimes he's angry at himself as that retreater. So he writes, I begin to develop contempt for the retreater, for the person who withdraws, for the thinker, for the visionary. He doesn't know anything about the facts of life. Now, what I'm saying is that it is not one or the other. But if we want to be whole human beings, we've got to breathe in and out, in and out, in and out. For when I withdraw, even for 15 minutes a day, I not only have a chance to restore the waste places of my own spirit, to recapture the lost radiance of my own commitment, see my own goals clarified, bring my own life more into focus. Whether I am a religious man or not, even in terms of straight humanist considerations, it is valid. But when I withdraw and center down in my own spirit, now this is what I believe, my friends. I believe in that act, I become involved in the very ground of vitality in which it is possible for me to make contact with other human beings at a level that transcends all the spoken that I can never understand through the formal discursive processes of mind. I'm going to say that sentence again. This is 100 years ago that he's talking like this. I believe in that act of in and out, breathing in and out. I become involved in the very ground of vitality in which it is possible for me to make contact with other human beings at a level that transcends all of the spoken that I can never understand through the formal discursive processes of mind. Making contact with other human beings at the level that is transcending the spoken word. That is the nerve center of consent. That, in my mind, is where compassion comes from. And that phrase right there, to me, is true leadership. He goes on to say, I think it is at that level that a great awareness, not only of the meaning in life in general, but the meaning and the dignity of human life. And then when I come out of that and go to work in my functioning, I am building my house, my world, by a blueprint that is eternal. I'm also going to say that one again. And then, when I come out of that inner state, and go to work, the outer state, in my functioning, I am building my house, my world, by a blueprint that is eternal. He says, and to know that that is possible, or even to dare to believe that that is possible and not try it, is to run the risk of missing out on perhaps the most tremendous thing in human life. I'm going to repeat that one. And to know that that is possible, or even to dare to believe that that is possible and not try it, is to run the risk of missing out on perhaps the most tremendous thing in human life. And when we bend, the words of our mouth and the meditations of our heart become acceptable to God because they are one and the same, and we are whole. This is the man the leaders of the civil rights movement went to for emotional and spiritual and physical nourishment. This is the grounding, the base, the foundation of what the civil rights movement was. A very quiet, soft-spoken, but strong, grounded, and centered man who understood what it means to transcend that external, to get into the internal, but then how to bring that internal back out into the world. And that is what I'm trying to talk about for this year. That is what I'm trying to bring into 2024, because as I said a few weeks ago, I don't want us to go in that same spiral of just the same dialogue and the same rhetoric. I want us and invite us to understand what true leadership is, to understand that each one of us has the ability to do exactly what Howard Thurman just invited us to do. And then we come together as a community to make it something larger and to put those pebbles in that bowl of water that goes out and out and out. That's what I think a compassionate system can be. And so what I was talking about, what I've been talking about for years, is that inner need for kindness. And I was really, I was very touched and honored. It wasn't about me, it was about all of you. But I was at the Grand Valley Interfaith Network meeting on Thursday, and Sherry Cole, who runs the Winter Emergency Shelter Program, was giving an update on what that on how the program is going. And for those of you, if you're visiting or you're a guest, we hosted the emergency program for the first 2 weeks in January, where we had up to 13 men sleeping in our congregation. And Sherry said as they were loading up the mattresses and moving on to the next location, one of the men came up to her and said, "You know, the Unitarians are just so kind." And that was so touching. She wasn't telling me that. She was actually just, that's how she is talking about our little community when she talks about the We Shelter. And that is all of you. and that it's like such an honor to be around people who understand what it means to genuinely be kind. And so I say we get to, pat ourselves on the back a little bit for that, for learning how to internalize that. And now that the invitation, what I've been thinking about this week is, okay, so what is the outer expression of that? What does it mean then to turn or work to create systems that have compassion woven within the system? And that is the next, I guess, our next step, perhaps. And I spent this morning thinking about that very question. Where are there systems, or do we have systems in which the compassion is built within the system? And unfortunately, that's not as easy to come up with. And that's disheartening. But I could kind of come up with some examples. The other sort of visionary who was born in 1878 and wrote a very popular classic, I don't know if it was a book, but I think it was a book called Ich und Du. I don't know if I said that right. Ich und Du. I and Thou, Martin Buber, in 1923 in Germany. It was translated into English in 1937, but the concept of the I and the Thou, and he talks about we can view the world in two ways. We can view the world around us as either an I-it, or we can view the world around us as an I-thou, an I-you relationship. And so as I was thinking about compassionate systems, perhaps changing our paradigm from an I-it expression to an I-thou expression. I, thou, want to talk to you on the phone.
I'm sorry, I thought I turned it off. It's on airplane mode, why did it come through?
Airplane mode, I think, likes Wi-Fi.
I think you're right, I'm just embarrassed, sorry guys.
That's okay, Janet. Someday this phone is going to ring, and it's going to ring through my computer, and then it's going to come through the sound system. But what Martin Buber was talking about, and is, I think maybe our systems have this paradigm of an I-it. What can we do to make more money? What can we do to be more productive? What can we do to make more sales? And then the system just becomes a kind of a thing outside of us. And we go within, and then we other the world around us. And what he was saying is that when you understand or you move through the world as an I, thou, things change a little bit. There we go. So Buber gives the example of a tree. So we can look at a tree as a collection of parts. We can look at a tree as leaves and wood and branches and roots to be chopped down and used for our own purposes as individual items to exploit. Or we can view the tree as a magnificent divine creation with which we interact on a cellular level. And so Alan Cheng summarizes Buber's analogy this way. It's not that there are two different worlds. It's more like there are two ways of looking at the same world. We can be an objective observer or a subjective participant. For example, I can study a tree and break it down into its parts and it becomes an it. Or I can look at it and express communion with it as a you. And when he says, when I'm in deep awe of the whole tree without trying to understand it, then it becomes a you. And so when we take that example of a tree viewed as a divine expression of life that is interacting back and forth with us, it becomes a relationship that we have, and it becomes this beautiful I-thou expression of relationship. So, what are some examples in which that might be happening in this world? And I've shared some of these examples before, but we see this indigenous worldview where there are places throughout the world now where rivers are actually being granted citizenship rights, where the river becomes so much more than a body of water for us to use, abuse, and exploit for our own selfish means. So on March 15th, 2017, the BBC reported that a river in New Zealand has become the first in the world to be granted the same legal rights as a person. The New Zealand Parliament passed the bill recognizing the Wanganui River in North Island as a living entity. Long revered by New Zealand's Maori people, the river's interests will now be represented by two people. The Maori had been fighting for over 160 years to get this recognition for their river, a minister said. From the Wanganui viewpoint, the well-being of the river is directly linked to the well-being of the people, and so it is really important that's recognized as its own identity. The members of the Maori community celebrated the news with tears and music in New Zealand's parliament. A recognition of the I-thou becoming part of the system. A relational acknowledgement that we are part of the water, that we need the water to survive, and that this water is in relationship with us at our most elemental level. When we view the world and the beings around us, I was going to say the things, do you see how even in language, the beings around us in this way, then everything becomes holy, and we understand and view the rivers and the streams and the trees and the plants and the minerals and the animals in this new way. And so what if we did that with everything and everybody around us? What if we began to view every human interaction from that perspective of I-thou? What if we viewed everything in our life as a divine expression of created beauty? What if we had every interaction, whether it be with other people or nature, with the gratitude that we just interacted with a divine expression of life, viewing it as its own creation that we are in relationship with? How might we change our own view of the world and our own experiences in this world? And so I was trying to think, like, what would that even look like within the systems that we are all a part of? And it was, like I said, it was a little bit discouraging because our systems are not necessarily set up as an I-thou paradigm. They're very much set up as an I-it paradigm. But I was able to come up with a few examples. For example, corporate offices that implement and create space for daycares so that parents can bring their children and have a safe place for their children while they're part of the corporate culture. That's kind of moving in the right direction. The hospitals throughout the country that have taken the time to purchase apartments across the street so that when people are flying in, families are flying in medical emergencies, they have a safe place to stay. That, I think, is an expression of understanding that I-thou from a system perspective. Schools providing lunch for children who are hungry. I mean, that's kind of basic, but that is part of an I-thou paradigm also. So, granting personhood to a river. I mean, that's a beautiful example of that. Community gardens. That's an example. So, when I started thinking about it, I realized that there are some examples, there is some precedence for how we do this. It's just not the norm, it's the exception, and maybe we need to work to change it from the exception into the rule. You know, one example, this community garden over here, a few years ago, I was talking to the woman at the library who was running it, and she said, what people don't understand is that that community garden is meant for people to go in and take the food and be fed. It's to feed the community. But we live in such a paradigm that in some areas that would be considered theft. It would be considered stealing. And so she said, nobody's doing it. And I was like, well, people don't know that they're supposed to do that. They don't know that they're allowed to do that. They don't want to get shamed or screamed at by stealing food in a community garden. And so it's just changing our paradigms, getting the words out. And so my invitation for us today and this week, and I would love if any of you have examples of how the I-thou might be expressed or is being implemented within the larger system. And we don't have tons of time, but is there just anybody off the top of their head that has an example? The library. The library, okay? And Mary? Medicaid. Okay. So it's there. So let's just continue to think about that. How are we doing that as you use in this little UUCGV community? I say we're doing pretty good with that inner and who we are, taking our own inner responsibility. And now the invitation is for us to become leaders, continue to acknowledge, claim our power, and see what we might build together with that new paradigm. This is the time, I think, to change the world as we know it, and we can do it. And we can do it in a circle, as we circle around for freedom. Number 155. Let's stand and sing.
Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for
we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.